words on them, no problem there, they were reading out. There's a fellow leaning over an altar, carving something up, and it says, sacrifice, things like that. And we started looking at little longer things, little inscriptions on jugs, wine jars, things like that, on the statue with a gladiator looking awfully sad with all his armour broken up, and the goddess has got her arm around him, and it says that how he's fallen down and has passed over. That is the traditional word for dying, and he's seeking refuge and succour from the goddess. So we then knew we could read Etruscan. We tackled the largest inscriptions we could find and are known in Etruria. One is the Perugia Keepus, about 36 lines of writing. Another one is the Persian tablets, 3 gold tablets, 1 in Carthaginian Punic and 2 in Etruscan. And they were found at the port of Carrara near Rome there. And they told a credible story. They told of a league apparently between Carthage and Etruria. Carthage is here, Etruria here. And what had happened is that when Cyrus, the emperor of Persia, got on the throne about 546 BC, he sent his general Harpagus along the coast here, and Harpagus' job was to clean up all the Greek cities. And most of them submitted, and he came to the Phocaeans and he said, look, knock down 1 tower of your wall, give us 1 house in the city for the emperor, and everything will be all right. They said, give us 24 hours to think it over. So he said, fine. Next morning he came along with his army and he found that the entire town had taken to the ships with all their women, children, everything they could carry, and had gone away. The Phocaeans sailed away, tried to get land here, couldn't get it, came round to Sardinia. And they thought it'd be a very good idea to set up as pirates. So they set up as pirates, and they traded on preying on the Etruscan fleets here and the Carthaginian fleets, the merchant fleets. So a league was formed between Carthage and Etruria to provide 60 ships each, a war fleet, to track down these Phocaeans and destroy them, which they did. And the Phocaeans were driven over there, and they finished up in Sicily. But that's what these tablets tell you in Welsh. We call it Welsh because it's probably Cumbric, right? We tackled the Agnone tablet from the Adriatic coast, which told of the origin of these people, how they come to be in Etruria. I'll tell you that later, if you like. So we're fairly confident we could deal with this. We tackled the Purian inscriptions, and they work out as well, no problem. So we then moved further back in time, and we got over to Turkey, tackled some of the inscriptions there. Primarily, the longest one we could get our hands on was the inscription over the supposed tomb of Midas. And that turns out to translate perfectly, logically, very well in the same technique, reading in the same language. So what we've got is a language coming from the east to the west, dying out in the east, dying out in Etruria, which is known to have died out there. And if you read Pliny and others, they'll say how Etruscan is totally different from Latin. There's no comparison, it's totally different from Greek. So it died out in the Mediterranean areas, but it's been preserved around there in Wales. This is the situation we have. This is the background then, against which we're working when we get an approach from Jim Michael. And he says to us, can you assist us? Do you know what this alphabet might be? And we say, yeah, sure, we know what it is. So while he's pressurizing us to sort of look west, we're saying to him, go away. We're going east. We're having to do a roots exercise. You think we're going backwards. And we've gone a lot further. Won't bore you with it. But we've got back to about 2000 BC. And all of it seems to fit in with the known histories. Whatever. Okay? When we were approached by Jim Michael, we supplied him with a little bit of information. Now what we found in the histories of Wales is what had been taught in the schools until about 1920, 1922. All the children in Wales were taught Arthur, son of King Myric, grandson of King Tudric, great-grandson of King Typhel, etc., where he lived, where they were all buried. All this was going on. There was a centralisation gradually of education in Wales from about 1860 onwards, which culminated in the 1920s, and everybody had to be taught the same thing. I don't know whether the English government were motivated by the Irish Rising of 1916 and 1922, which frightened them. But history is a powerful weapon. It's a powerful political tool. And there are no textbooks in Wales to teach children Welsh history at this moment. There aren't any. No child is taught any Welsh history other than the bit the teacher might know. So they learn all about William the Conqueror in England and Magna Carta, and they don't learn their own stuff. So we told him what we thought would start him off. If you read the life of Brendan, it starts off, and Brendan heard of the voyage of the Tyrant. It means, and Brendan heard of the voyage of the Monarch. That's what it means.
The
and
Tyrant means monarch?
This great land across the oceans or whatever. And they said to Brendan, you will not get there in a boat made of skins. You must go to the men who make ships of timber. So he did. And they agreed to make him a ship of wood. And some of the men who made the ship agreed to sail with him to show him the way. Now, if they're going to show him the way, you've got to ask yourself a question. And you've got to also ask, who was the monarch at the time? Well, if you're talking about the British monarch, then you're talking about Arthur, son of Myrick, grandson of Theodoric.
It says King Tyrant, the monarch, sails in 560 through 570 AD.
No doubt about that. Taliesin means high intellect. Henug is a saint in Gwent.
And it says the other world, 580 AD.
And Henug advised the author of the life of St. Samson how to write it around the year 600. Okay? Samson being a nephew of Arthur the Longer. What we didn't know was that there was some hiatus about Madoc, because we had stopped our studies around the year 1100, because we said, look, we're going backwards in time, not forwards in time. We're doing a little bit of what Alex Haley did in his roots. We didn't want to come forward, we wanted to go backwards. Our assumption was that Madoc had been correctly dated around 1170. There was so much written about him by so many people that you would anticipate they'd done their homework. So we said, Madoc, that's what's known at the moment. Well, it's a problem, because we knew in 1983 that Arthur had sailed west on the Western Ocean around 574. We knew that, because the evidence is monumental. There's not one source, there's dozens. And here we had this Madoc effort. So we said, send us some information. Well, we were sent a book by a gentleman in America on Madoc. We looked at it in an effort to trace Madoc for him. And we threw up our hands in dismay and said, this is ridiculous. What do we do? And the only thing we could think to do was to go back to square one and start from a scratch position with it, which is almost what happened. There were wild statements, nobody knows where Ely is. Wow. It's a big district in Cardiff, 60,000 people live there. Nobody knows who William Fleming was. Wow. He's the High Sheriff of Cardiff. Nobody knows where Matt lived, and so on. And we said, this is absurd. We've got to get this to square one. So we really began to look at Madoc again just a couple of years ago. And we found that he's harder to miss than he is to find. And that's not an exaggeration. What have we got here? What had happened in the middle of the 6th century in Britain is one of the best recorded efforts in history. Again, multiple sources, at least a dozen lives of saints, in the histories, in the prophecies of Ere, all over the place. A great comet or other body from outer space struck Britain. Right? It devastated the entire country, right across the south of Britain, and appears to have affected parts of Ireland. It may be the reason why the Scots moved out of Northern Ireland, crossed over, and went to Western Scotland. They were originally in Ireland. So that's what they did at that time. The records are very clear that most of the country had to be evacuated. People fled to the southwestern tip of Britain, Cornwall, they fled to Ireland, and they fled to their kinsmen in Brittany and Ludlow, which later became Normandy. Huge areas could not be lived in for at least 7 and sometimes until 11 years. This is probably the origin of the romance stories of Arthurian knights entering the great wastelands, which you'll find peppered all over the romance tales. What has happened is that independent of us, Fortunately, Oxford University Astrophysics Department, in the person of this gentleman, Dr. Victor Klug, has come to the same conclusion, that a comet struck Britain in the middle of the 6th century. Place names everywhere actually indicate that it did. So we've got records in the lives of the saints, we've got them in the triads, we've got them in the histories, we've got them in the ancient poetry, we've got it everywhere.
So what is he saying, that in the 6th century, so in the 500s, that a comet hit Britain? It was devastation over there? I don't know. I can't confirm or deny. That's something I will have to research, but that's also something that you can research as well. Every drop counts.
Comet strikes Britain. It seems to have had a similar effect to the disasters in Egypt at the time of Moses. The birds died, the animals died, that's the farm animals and the wild. The reptiles died, the fish in the rivers died, people died, the plants died, nothing lived. All the buildings were shaken, it says, to the very foundations, the roofs fell in. This is probably why... So we've got records in the lives of the saints, we've got them in the triads, we've got them in the histories, we've got them in the ancient poetry, we've got it everywhere. Comet strikes Britain. It seems to have had a similar effect to the disasters in Egypt at the time of Moses. The birds died, the animals died, that's the farm animals and the wild. The reptiles died, the fish in the rivers died, people died, the plants died, nothing lived. All the buildings were shaken, it says, to the very foundations, the roofs fell in. This is probably why all the Roman cities and towns in Britain were totally ruined, whereas they've survived, in some cases, in very good state in France and Italy and North Africa, but they were shaken to pieces in Britain. It must have been awesome, and Oxford University not estimate the blast to be something equivalent to 100 Hiroshima atom bombs. This is what happened. When it happened, Madoc Morfran, is the fleet admiral and is at sea. And he gets blasted out by the huge tornadoes and waves and winds, and he doesn't know where he is. He comes back after 10 years when a lot of people have begun to return to the country, including the king. Because the king took the army out of the country and planted it in Ludlow, later Normandy. And he took the army with him because he knew he might have to fight his way back in. Madoc comes back after 10 years and they say, where have you been? Because you can't stay at sea for 10 years, the ship will fall apart, you can't live. So he promptly told them of this wonderful, huge, vast land he'd been in, where hardly anybody lived.
That's a lie.
He said quite clearly in one record, he was ridiculed because they couldn't follow his star directions. Obviously they used the stars as people did through all ages for navigation. So they send out an admiral named Gwenon. All I'm doing is telling you what's in the record. And Gwenon came back and said, it's right, it's there. So now they hold a big council, and the king calls all the government in and they have a parley and see what they'll do. And they decide this is an act of God. Because their country has been destroyed, God has shown them another country. That's what it says. And there's one long poem between Arthur, son of Uther, and Llywelyn, son of Madoc, son of Uther. So that makes Arthur and Madoc both sons of Uther, therefore brothers, and Llywelyn is Arthur's nephew. Interesting, because Llywelyn means coloured man. It doesn't mean black man, it means brown man. I find that astonishing. And the thing goes on through about 40 verses.
Take that back.
And it says quite clearly in one record, he was ridiculed because they couldn't follow his star directions. Obviously they used the stars as people did through all ages for navigation. So they send out an admiral named Gwenon. All I'm doing is telling you what's in the record. And Gwenon came back and said, it's right, it's there. So now they hold a big council, and the king calls all the government in and they have a parley and see what they'll do. And they decide this is an act of God. Because their country has been destroyed, God has shown them another country. That's what it says. And there's one long poem between Arthur, son of Uther, and Llywelyn, son of Madoc, son of Uther. So that makes Arthur and Madoc both sons of Uther, therefore brothers, and Llywelyn is Arthur's nephew. Interesting, because Llywelyn means coloured man. It doesn't mean black man, it means brown man. I find that so.
So Madoc's son, I can't catch his name, meant brown man, copper man, right? He said, I find it doesn't mean black man, it means brown man, colored man. Colored man. Excuse me. In 1828. You already knew which one I wanted. Okay. Let's bring it the long way. Says American definition. 1828. A native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals. But we know we're not an admix, so we're not Aboriginals. We are the originals. We are the autochtons, or the copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of the Europeans born in America. That the last part of that, but now applies to the descendants of the Europeans born in America. You are talking about first class identity theft. Okay, first class. It says the name American must also exalt the pride of patriotism. And patriotism, ask a psychologist, it's a mental disease. Because how can you be patriotic of a land that your people stole? You know what I'm saying? How can you be patriotic to a corporation? That's why they say patriotism is a mental disease. Okay? If you don't believe me, check it out yourself. Okay?
And the thing goes on through about 40 verses of poetry where first Arthur asks questions and the other guy answers it. And the king can't understand how there is such a vast country with nobody guarding it. No coast guards, no kings protecting their rights. Are they Christians? Do they have cities? You know, question and answer. And he finally decides that he will sail for this country. We have so far located, I think, 4 ancient records and a further 6 medieval records of the fleet. And he assembled 700 ships in Milford Haven, that's in the west of Wales, and they sailed the Western Ocean for this country. So it was 3 voyages, first Madoc by accident, checked out by the Admiral, and then the king sails with Madoc and others. And they also brought a man named Ammon with him, who was the king's brother-in-law.
Ammon?
The
Really?
tales go on, and they say how the king was in America, or we assume it's America, for 4 years. He is assassinated by a naked savage.
A naked
and I
savage.
find that very difficult to place in Western Europe. They wrap 3 ladies of the court, wrap the king's body in leather, deer skins, 3 of them. They place his armour on him so that people will recognise him, because they dry wither him, which is a form of mummification. They dry him out, obviously. And they place him in a boat, and 7 men begin a celebrated voyage, which is enumerated time and time again. And this celebrated voyage brings him back. Well, we already knew the other end of the voyage because we had several records, very, very clear ones, in great detail, of a ship arriving at the mouth of the Owenny River in South Wales with a body in a bag, and they put it in a boat, a leather bag, take it upriver to St. Illtyd, who is a first cousin of this King Arthur, and he takes it into a cave, and they plop the body in the cave for a while. If you go into that cave, which is still there, obviously, there is a pit running east and west. It's well into the cave, and it's about 11 feet long, very squared off, 3.5 feet wide, about 3.5 feet deep, man-made in granite, and you wouldn't do that much work for a peasant. Later, they take the king out and they bury him on a hill nearby in a church, and the church is easily identifiable from many records. So it's rather an odd circumstance. Where did the ship come from? It's bothered everybody for centuries. Right? Okay, where are we going with this? Right. We already knew something about this one because everybody had spotted this. They said, they do not know the brindled ox, thick as headband, 7 score knobs on his collar. They described him a brown ox with a mane, which, in my opinion, can only be the American buffalo. And here are the 7 men. When we went with Arthur of anxious memory, 7, except 7, none returned for Carbanbury. Huh? The famous poem is called Prydau Annwn. It means the voyage to the other world, and they constantly alluded to the other world. Medieval people couldn't understand all this, and they thought the other world was a mystic fairyland in the what they call Celtic imagination. Bit odd, because we've already seen that the Welsh weren't Celts, they were Chaldeans.
He said the other world, and they always talk about the nether world. So could the nether world and the other world both be synonymous to the Americas? To you, where myth and legends live? I'm just saying, something to think about.
And they've never claimed to be Celts. But when they...
And they say these Celts are Chaldeans. Chaldeans. Who came from a Chaldean bloodline? I'll wait. I'm going to give you time. Bingo. Wasn't Abraham Chaldean, if I'm not mistaken? Wasn't he Chaldean? But then Abraham come out of Shem's line. So this still seems to be falling within our family bloodline. Okay?
Decided very blandly in England in the early 1800s to get rid of Welsh history because they were Trojans and Troy hadn't existed. Of course, later on, Henrik Schliemann found Troy. And of course, things took an about turn, but nobody bothered to reverse the decision. So they had to give a label to them, so they stuck Celts on their neck. It's suitable, it'll do. And this is what appears to be happening.
So Celts mean it's synonymous for Chaldeans? That's what he's saying?
Okay, let's go on a bit. In order to get in the picture, I've drawn this little chart. You can see Arthur the Black. Hang on, let's go back a minute.
Arthur the Black.
Arthur the Black.
Arthur the Black. When no white people naming themselves the Black. Okay? Nobody was. Even though white people are originally the black people because they are void of color. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, we was putting that in our names, distinguishing who we were. You know what I'm saying? So, gotta swear to hijacks. Swear to hijacks, pick up the Jews. Swear to hijacks, pick up the Jews. Swear to hijacks, pick up the Jews. Swear.
He's the son of Maximus, right? 383, Magnus was in Britain, married Helen, the second wife, son of the Schliemann, found Troy. And of course things took an about turn, but nobody bothered to reverse the decision. So they had to give a label to them, so they stuck Celts on their neck. It's suitable, it'll do. And this is what appears to be happening. Okay, let's go on a bit. In order to get in the picture, I've drawn this little chart. You can see Arthur the Black. Hang on, let's go back a minute. Arthur the Black. He's the son of Maximus, right? 383, Magnus was in Britain, married Helen, the second wife, son of the King Eudac, Octavius, and they invaded France in 383. It's a well-known history. His chief general was known to the Romans as Androgatius, but he's Arthur the First. They seized Paris, he seized the Lady Guinevere, Schliemann, found Troy, and of course things...
Watch how many names he name off, okay, for one person. When he's talking about King Arthur, okay? Just listen to the names, okay? Because see, that's how they throwing us off. When they make these duplicates of our history, they change the names and dates to throw us off. Okay. And they tweak the events.
Took an about turn, but nobody bothered to reverse the decision. So they had to give a label to them, so they stuck Celts on their neck. It's suitable, it'll do. And this is what appears to be happening. Okay, let's go on a bit. In order to get in the picture, I've drawn this little chart for you. You can see Arthur the Black. Hang on, let's go back a minute. Arthur the Black, he's the son of Magnus Maximus, right?
Magnus Maximus.
383, Magnus was in Britain, married Helen, the second wife, son of the King Eudac, Octavius, and they invaded France in 383. It's a well-known history. His chief general was known to the Romans as Androgatius, but he's Arthur the First. They seized Paris, he seized the Lady Genevieve, Saint Genevieve, fought a big battle with the Roman Emperor Gratian at Soissons, 12 miles south of Paris in 383, defeated him, chased him down to Lyons, said to Gratian, let's call it a day, let's have a banquet. Gratian comes to the banquet, Arthur cuts him in half with an axe. Magnus then becomes Emperor of the West. Spain goes over to them, all of North Africa, fights their way through Switzerland, down into Italy. That's why there is a carving of Arthur besieging a city in Modena Cathedral, you see, showing all the characters engaged in this expedition of 383. Down to Italy they go, another carving of Arthur, a mosaic in Taranto, in a cathedral there, crosses over into the Balkans and Greece, and he fights two big battles with the Emperor Theodosius of Constantinople in 388. So you've got a real live Arthur doing the things the medieval said, fighting the Romans. The problem in later times was people said, how can Arthur fight the Romans and fight the Saxons? He's 250 years old. This is ridiculous. Well, it's not. He's two people. You see, they've welded Arthur the First in with Arthur the Second, on the bottom, who fights the Angles and Saxons. And by welding them together into one gigantic king, they caused the problem. Once you read the Welsh records, you sort them out with ease, and they're not a problem. And they both figure quite prominently, correctly in the history. All right? Let's get on with it. See where we're going. I've put this one in because when in about 920, a fellow named Owen, the son of Howell the Good, who I mentioned before, his name's on Calvin on a monument, 948. Around 920, Owen is getting married, so they drew up all the necessary king lists to prove all his ancestry and pedigree and marriage to all the other kings. The list of the kings of the West Midlands contains at the bottom, hang on, let's get back, a very interesting statement. It actually tells you where Glastonbury is. It says this Glastonbury is called Lichfield. This is a bit of a shaker because it means that Glastonbury is 200 miles from where people think it is. And Glaston's in Cornish and in Breton is oak trees. Also Derwin and Glaston is Welsh for oak, but also Glasdennan is the scarlet oak. And there's a long pedigree to this, but people have been looking in the wrong place because Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset wasn't founded until 942. So a little bit of history there. It does tell you what perhaps has been going on and how a bit of mayhem has been going on with the history. Okay? So what we've got basically here is Madoc is at sea, about 562. Gregory of Tours tells how the two great islands in the ocean. Gregory of Tours was in France, French nobleman and abbot. He writes the history of the Franks. He's alive at the time. Okay? His history still exists in great detail. He mentions how the two great islands in the ocean were smashed to pieces, set on fire from end to end, and people had to flee from them. So we've got a contemporary reference from another source outside
Two
the
great
UK.
islands. Two great islands in the sea. Is he talking about Atlantis and Lemuria? Is that what he's talking about, Atlantis and Lemuria? Okay.
Madoc at sea, Comet strikes Britain, okay? But also Glasdennan is the scarlet oak. And there's a long pedigree to this, but people have been looking in the wrong place, because Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset wasn't founded until 942. So a little bit of history there. It does tell you what perhaps has been going on and how a bit of mayhem has been going on with the histories. Okay? So what we've got basically here is Madoc is at sea, about 562. Gregory of Tours tells how the two great islands in the ocean. Gregory of Tours was in France, French nobleman and abbot. He writes the history of the Franks. He's alive at the time. Okay? His history still exists in great detail. He mentions how the two great islands in the ocean were smashed to pieces, set on fire from end to end.
He's talking about islands in
People had to
Britain.
flee from them. So we've got a contemporary reference
It
from
say
another
British,
source outside the UK.
you know, the British comment, whatever,
Madoc
but he's
at
still
sea,
talking about
comments
these
like
two
Britain,
islands.
Okay? Jim, you can't spell Britain. 572, 10 years later, Madoc returns to Britain.
This blurry, I'm
573,
sorry.
the Admiral verifies it. And 574, the King sails to the other world. It's what the Spanish call the New World. They call it the other world. The King is killed and mummified 578. He's returned 579, put in an unmarked tomb, but it's well described in the Songs of the Graves. It's in great detail.
579, King Arthur body is shipped back home. He's here for 4 years. His brother Madoc dies here. In the article I was reading, his brother Madoc dies here. King Arthur dies here, and his body is sunk back. But I don't believe Madoc body was sunk back. Madoc body stayed here. Okay? They said 578, I believe, that his body, or 579, his body returned. Let's hear it again.
Madoc at sea, comet strikes Britain, okay? Jim, you can't spell Britain. 572, 10 years later, Madoc returns to Britain. 573, the Admiral verifies it. And 574, the King sails to the other world. It's what the Spanish call the New World. They call it the other world.
The netherworld.
The King is killed and mummified 578. He's returned 579. Put in an unmarked tomb, but it's well described in the Songs of the Graves. It's in great detail.
579.
And in about 580, Merlin, who is Taliesin, several references to Merlin. But I am Taliesin means high intellect, and men shall call me Merlin, right? And he also says, for I am Merlin, and men shall call me Taliesin. Merlin actually is Merlin, it means little horse.
Little horse.
These people are Gnostic Christians, and little horse is the sort of power appointed by God, Sabaoth, to control benignly the world with intelligence and with enlightenment.
Semiot.
Sabaoth
like
is
a fallen
enlightenment, little
angel.
horse is enlightenment. So what he's saying, well, I am
Because it sounds
Merlin,
like
but I am
Semiel.
and men shall call me Taliesin, men shall call me high intellect.
Not
And the king
Semiel,
is later
but
buried out of the cave into the St. Peter's
can't even
Church
think of his
at
name right now.
Caercarada. And it's well known that 168 histories in England that say that he's buried at Caercarada. You only got to do is find Caercarada, it's not hard. Okay? What have we got here? Yeah. Most of the writing in Cauldron was done on sticks. They didn't often write on stone. But fortunately for us, they did enough of it for us to prove it and check it out. There's one stone in London actually dug up in St. Paul's Cathedral churchyard, and Arthur is always associated in the romance stories with stones in St. Paul's Cathedral churchyard for some reason or other. And that stone tells how the country is in a fallen and rotten and terrible decayed state. And it also says that the king intends to take a voyage. And it ties in with the prophecies of Eric, the prophecies of towards that which is beyond, which they constantly call this place, where we are now. And on that stone there are clear messages which tie in, and there is it's a carving which clearly indicates the great dragon that they identified as the comet. So
the great dragon as a comet. Why do that sound like the destroyer?
We got back,
why do that sound like
from
Nibiru?
Britain to Etruria, back to the Turkish area. These people were coming through Asia Minor, Turkey, at the very time that another group of the same group were coming through, known to the Greeks as the Chimeroi.
Chimeroi.
And in Herodotus, they're the Cimmerians. Herodotus was writing histories from 460 BC. Apparently, these are the people who were planted in northern Assyria by the kings of Assyria, and in the various libraries of emperors of Assyria that were dug up by Layard, the archaeologist, they're mentioned and, well, they're not just mentioned, they're described as the Cymry, K-H-U-M-R-Y, the Cymry. The Cymry took off, if you read the second book of Esdras, the apocryphal book, and they moved westwards. Apparently when the mayhem was going on in the Assyrian Empire with the murder of the emperor by two of his sons. And they moved westwards, crossed the Euphrates, crossed the other branch of the Euphrates, and into Asia Minor. So there's a trace of these Cymry becoming the Chimeroi or Cimmerians, moving into this Trojan area around 650 BC. It's a very strange thing, but the Welsh are not the Welsh. That's an English word. It means strangers in High German. They call themselves the Cymry, K-H-U-M-R-Y. No difference. And their language traces all the way back. Other strange thing is if you find the Bible and go through the Bible, you'll find a dozen or more references. There are one or two on the bottom of this page here from Ezekiel and from Numbers. And it says, Son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions, and then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph. The other one says from Numbers, take every one of them a rod, write thou every man's name upon his rod. And we all remember how Aaron throws down his rod, doesn't he, before Pharaoh, and it conquers the two rods of the Egyptian priests. They used to write on sticks too. So this writing on sticks is also recorded by the Hittites used to do it. This little alphabet was drawn up for Welsh school children in the 1800s by a couple of teachers, and you can see you've got at the bottom the Calvin alphabet, or a version of it, and you've also got above it Ogham. And at the very top you've got the Arwen sign from which all these letters are derived, and Jim Michaels told you about that, how it appears on everything everywhere. In Britain it's on every government office, tax offices, Department of Agriculture offices, any jail they build, any army place, every piece of military equipment. So state cipher, and it's on documents of state signed by the king as far back as 1250 and probably earlier. It's the state sign.
We're going to get into that. The Colburn alphabet sounds a lot like the Colburn Bible, but I digress.
Greek, yeah. The interesting thing is it's obviously in a Colburn alphabet. It's unmistakable, and you have the Christian cross on the bottom. That's the most significant feature of it, and the statement ties up very well, readable Welsh. That's the alphabet as preserved by John Williams and by Llewellyn Shawn. Llewellyn Shawn in 1560, John Williams published it in 1846. As you can see, he says, isn't it a little remarkable, all the above comprise, with 4 or 5 exceptions, all the old Etruscan or Pelasgic, he really means Phrygian letters, which were probably but little different from Greek characters used in the time of Caesar. When Julius Caesar landed in the UK, he wrote his wars as he went along, so he extolled himself, and he said, the British letters are very similar to the Greek. Ammianus Mas.
Shout out to Harm Art. Shout out to Harm Art. We learned from Harm Art, being in his classroom, that Greek, Latin, Rome, French, these are all romantic languages, and they all stem from Shem, from a branch of Shem, okay? So he's still talking about family. This Colburn is connected to the romantic languages, and we take that back. The romantic languages comes out of Shem. Okay? I believe he said they came out of Shem.
Solinus, another Roman writer, says the Greeks got their letters from the British. Simply outlandish. And there is, of course, the ancient story of Abaris, the Druid, going to Greece around the year 650 and teaching the Greeks. You never know. Again, this is published in 1906 by a lady named Evans, and she again exhibits variants of these alphabets as the thing was being mutilated a little because they were mixing it with Latin in the Dark Ages. Okay? This is an inscription again from an overhang which I think is known as the pig pen in Kentucky. There's a guy who keeps pigs under this overhang. It's not quite a cave. You can see the Arwen sign, you can see a tomb mound, and you can see an inscription which is part of a larger inscription, and it tells how they're crying out from the tomb. Again, more of that inscription from the pig pen. We have translated and deciphered the entire thing. No problem. There it is. That's another one, Calvin inscription in America. This is a covenant inscription. It actually says, I'll translate it to you, towards strength to divide the land we are spread over purely, justly between our offspring in wisdom. So in order to be strong, we will stay, united, and we'll divide the land between each other, and we'll see that our offspring get fair shares. Right? What would you call it? Bill of Rights? I don't know, maybe a Declaration of Independence. It's a constitution, right?
It's in the library of Mead County.
Yeah, well, it exists. This is a little stone that was found on the head of a man who was clearly a very important man in a very large grave mound. I think it's at Bat Creek. That's it, Tennessee, right. He had some bracelets which are believed to be not of American sort of provenance in that they are smelted metal, and therefore they're copper and other alloyed metal bracelets, which apparently are European smelting stuff. He did apparently have some wooden plugs with him, circular plugs, which had been carbon dated, which fetches from the 6th century. And I can remember getting a letter from Jim Michael, sitting down with my colleague, and we said, what's he got to say this time, We felt Michael's getting a pest. And we sat down and looked at it, and we deciphered that stone. And we'd had photographs of it sent to us, and we said, he's got it upside down. We turned it the other way around, and we could read it. It actually says, the ruler Madoc he is, or to that effect. So it would appear that the man in this mound was named Madoc. Okay? Clearly an important man from the size of the mound, so I'm told, and with the bits and pieces with it. Big tall man, bigger than the average Indian, about 6 feet, which you'd expect. And that's a nephew of Jim Michaels holding the stone. There you go again. Madoc, he is, thou art the ruler. Distinctly, thou art the ruler. That's how it actually translates.
That looks like paleo.
That's another stone, obviously.
Oh, here's something else. This looks weird.
I'm not sure how to say this. It's difficult to go with Welsh syntax. An Englishman will say, you're a clever lad. But a Welshman will say, there is a clever lad, you are. The syntax is backward speak. It's all over the place. It's not the same syntax as we would use in English. But it says, pure and fresh, sure and certain, the great flood to follow, that we think that's to render a strait. They're going through a strait or a narrow confined pass of water. So they're going to try for the head of the Atlantic. Free and large, ample space. We're sailing either with Uther, or Uther actually means wonderful, so with Uther, taking off, he, what is pervading. These are just some lines from a very, very long poem of several hundred lines by Taliesin. It means, Adush Nai, Taliesin. I went for a while, Taliesin. So he went for a while, came back. And it says, repetitively through the poem, brought back, I mean they're bringing somebody back, through fog and mist, the chief wolf of heaven. Arthur is frequently alluded to as the chief wolf of heaven. In the time to gather harvests, we know roughly when he's due in. Brought back thine fair passage through the seas, right? The seas through. Brought back from Ere, and they're always referring to this distant place across the Western Ocean as Ere, to the churchyard on the brink in Sean, where the influence, it was brought to the Ewenny estuary in Glamorgan, estuary of the river. Brought back the knight upon golden armour bearing. 3 accounts say he's got his golden armour on. 1 account also says there's a gold face mask, we don't know. Brought back in mind and thought with atonement to give extreme unction. So they brought him back perhaps to settle the succession to the throne. And if you don't bring him back, it could be mayhem, as who's going to be king. Brought back, born, conveyed, the leather bag. Courteous, what is the best formally the singer, musician, artist, that's it. Brought back in summer with slow mild lang days. Brought back to a solitary spot in deerskin, salved or embalmed. And then they say, brought back, applied with salve, they've embalmed him. and brought back as a fish in his proceeding. In other words, like a fish in the bottom of a boat. Now this gives you a little flavour of it. We can't obviously not tell you, because these poems run into hundreds of lines and go into fantastic detail, but it gives you an idea of what's going on. So what we've got is a bit of final proof, as Jim would call it. If there's anything I've left out or you've got any questions, we'd be very, very happy to try and answer them. So what you've got is really Welsh-speaking Indians. Wallam Olam is their record. Watlam Oplam in Welsh means the organisation of everybody. Bit odd. We've got the Melungians with blood factors, and they're a strange lot. Melungians have got I could call a dulcimer, which is like a lap half, is it not a lap? Long days, brought back to a solitary spot in deerskin, salved or embalmed. And then they say, brought back, applied with salve, they've embalmed him, and brought back as a fish in his proceeding. In other words, like a fish in the bottom of a boat. Now this gives you a little flavour of it. We can't obviously not tell you, because these poems run into hundreds of lines and go into fantastic detail, but it gives you an idea of what's going on. So what we've got is a bit of final proof, as Jim would call it. If there's anything I've left out or you've got any questions, we'd be very, very happy to try and answer them. So what you've got is really Welsh-speaking Indians. Wallam Olam is their record. Watlam Oplam in Welsh means the organisation of everybody. Bit odd. We've got the Melungians with blood factors, and they're a strange lot. Melungians have got I could call a dulcimer, which is like a lap half, is it not a lap guitar? Well, identical instruments in Wales called a crwth. I don't know. Metallurgy, forensics dating with fallen hoof, 6th century manuscripts, a mass of them, not one or two, a mass of them. It's a celebrated event. And we've got the epigraphics of decipherment, and we hope to get DNA. And what we're going to try and do is find out if we can get some of the family over there, get a little bit of bone or a little bit of something, DNA it, and we've got a university willing to do it, and if we can get some items over here, if we can get this jawbone of Madoc, which is in the Smithsonian, then a DNA test will link them up, and there's no argument. End of story. Carbon testing will help. So we have some lights. Should we go to lights? Let the dog see the rabbit?